Hi everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. On today's show, we finish up the Han Solo trilogy. Following the Battle of Nar Shaddaa, Han and Chewie are riding high. They run spice, fly circles around the competition, and make a lot of credits. Then, a blast from Han's past returns to ask the smugglers to join a raid to take out the spice manufacturing facility on Elysia. The scoundrels agree, but are left in the lurch when the mission isn't exactly what it seems. It's Rebel Dawn by A.C. Crispin, the third and final book in the Han Solo trilogy. But before we get into the book, it's listener question time. Today's email comes from longtime listener Ugo. Ugo says, if Disney decided we're going to start fresh and we're going to bring the Legends stories to the screen, either in live action or animated, what would be the first Legends story you would like to see? I would like to see a series based on the Darth Plagueis book. Well, thank you very much for the email, Ugo. This is a variation of a question that I get a lot. People email me or shoot me a message on Twitter or Blue Sky or Instagram. What Legends stories would you like to see on the screen? Ugo's email says that if the studio decided to start fresh, I interpret that to mean that they are scrapping everything moving forward from this date, November 1st, 2024, that has not been shown on the screen yet. So, the challenge is to find a story that would fit with the existing movies, shows, books, and video games in canon that we already have. Ugo, you've chosen a good one in the Legends book, Darth Plagueis. There's a lot of room in the time period between the Acolyte series and Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And most of the events in James Luceno's book would work. There are only a very few things that would need to be changed to make everything match up with the canon. So, because Ugo, you picked that book, I'll try to pick something different. 2 stories, one for live action and one for animation. Number 1, I think an X-Wing series would be fantastic. I know Lucasfilm had planned to make a Rogue Squadron movie directed by Patty Jenkins. That doesn't look like the film is ever going to happen. But I would be interested in seeing a military-style series, like Battlestar Galactica meets Band of Brothers. We know that the Galactic Civil War continued after the Battle of Endor. The Empire wasn't fully defeated until the Battle of Jakku, about 5 years later. But how did the Rebellion/New Republic take Coruscant? Maybe it happened similarly to Michael Stackpole's Rogue Squadron books. We'd get a ton of cool characters between the Rogues and the Wraiths that Aaron Alston created. And of course, they could create new characters to join the ranks. If I could will this story into existence, the one thing that I would omit is the storyline with Corran Horn being taken captive in the Superstar Destroyer Lusancia that is hidden in the Coruscant underground before it blasts off the planet. But besides that, I think most of the story, specifically in those first 4 X-Wing books, the Stackpole books, they would work well as a Disney Plus series. Now, my second choice would be a Japanese-style anime, that of the Darth Bane trilogy by Drew Karpyshyn. Think about it. 24 episodes, one 8-episode season for each of the 3 books that show Bane becoming a powerful dark side Force user, destroying the Brotherhood of Darkness, establishing the Sith Rule of 2, and then training an apprentice and his eventual successor, Darth Zana. Personally, I think stories centered around the Force work better in animation or in books or in video games. Sometimes in live action, for me, the way the Force is shown on the screen just looks a little odd. So make this story animated and use some of the stuff we saw in Star Wars Visions as the template. Visions is one of my favorite on-screen Star Wars projects from the last decade. And my favorite animation styles were the ones used in The Village Bride and The Ninth Jedi in the first season, and the ones used in Sith and Journey to the Dark Head in the second season. Honestly, I think the animation in Sith, the first episode of the second season of Star Wars Visions, was just amazing. If Lucasfilm hired El Guri Studios to adapt the Bane trilogy into that style of animation, sign me up right now. I want to see what that looks like. Thanks again for the question, Ugo. Listener, if you have a question for the show, you can email me at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, just record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time for today's book, Rebel Dawn by A.C. Crispin. Grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins on the planet Bespin. Han needs credits, and he hopes the easiest way to make some quickly is in the Cloud City Sabacc tournament. Lando told Han about the tournament following the Battle of Nar Shaddaa. The gambler said Han was a pretty good player. He should try his hand against the best. If Han could raise the 10,000 credit buy-in. Lando probably didn't think there was any chance the smuggler could raise the stake, but Han cashes in the Krayt Dragon Pearl that he had swiped when escaping Imperial Admiral Greelanx's office after the Battle of Nar Shaddaa. It just covers the buy-in. But hey, Han just wants a chip and a chance. Dozens of players bust out during the first few sessions of play. Hours later, 7 people make the final table, including Han and Lando. The final game is intense. Chips and cards fly. But eventually, it all comes down to Han and Lando. When the dealer doles out the cards, Han can't believe his hand. 23. A pure sabacc. He pushes everything into the pot. Lando calls, but he can't cover Han's bet. The gambler places a marker on the table and announces that if he loses, Han can take ownership of any starship on Lando's ship lot. Han agrees. The only hand that can beat Han's is an idiot's array. But it turns out Lando's bluffing, and he busts out. Han rakes in his winnings and immediately says he wants the Millennium Falcon. But it's my personal ship, Lando says. You said any ship on your lot, Han replies, and the Falcon is parked on the lot. Reluctantly, Lando agrees. Han and Chewie excitedly race away from Cloud City, flush with credits, and now the new owners of the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. The smugglers head to Kashyyyk to upgrade their new ship and to give Chewie some time with his family. A family he hasn't seen in 50 years. The Wookiee also reunites with an old flame, Malatobuk. Chewie is nervous that his former girlfriend has moved on. It has been 50 years. But Mala has never married. She's always held out hope that Chewie would return home someday. And now that he has, they decide to make their love permanent. The Wookiees marry and spend a night together as newlyweds. Han is happy for Chewie, but he's a little sad that their partnership is over. Han says goodbye to the couple when Mala growls and takes a swing at him. Fortunately for Han, Chewie catches his wife's claw before it lands. Han is confused. What did he do to make Malla so angry? But Chewie diffuses the tensions. He tells Han that a life debt is the most sacred vow a Wookiee can make. Marrying Malla doesn't change that. And now that they're married, Chewie's honor and Malla's honor are one and the same. Han apologizes to Malla. He and Chewie load up the newly modified Falcon and head off to the corporate sector to make their fortunes. While the two friends are off on their adventures, the politics behind the Hutt clans continue moving forward. Jilliak is now a proud mother, but the crime lord's maternity leave is angering her nephew Jabba. Jilliak just won't focus on the clan's business, and quickly, Jabba believes it's about time for a change in leadership. Jabba begins by going behind Jilliak's back and contacts Elysia, where Terrawenza has been wanting to throw off the shackles of the Besettii clan and take control of the Elysian spice manufacturing operation. The High Priest already killed the head of Besettii, Lord Auric. Now, with help and credits, Jabba says it's time for the Talandatil to remove Besettii completely from Elysia. Meanwhile, Auric's son Durga is still investigating his father's death. He's tried almost everything and spent a fortune, but he just can't find the link between the Disilogic clan, Terrawenza, and Lord Auric's death. Finally, at his wit's end, Durga contacts the Black Sun Crime Syndicate. He asks Prince Shizor if the Crime Lord's network of spies can find the connection. And of course, the prince does. The Disilogic clan bought a rare synthetic toxin and ordered Terrawenza to soak the Nala tree frogs from Elysia that Auric loved to eat in that toxin. They then used valuable artifacts to pay the Talandatil to hide the credit transfer. Enraged, Durga challenges Jilliak to mortal combat in accordance with the old law. It's a fight to the death. 2 Hutts enter the room, 1 Hutt leaves. Durga knows that if he gets caught beneath the much larger Jilliak, it's over. She'll crush him. But Durga has one advantage. He's quicker than the huge crime lord. The 2 behemoths smash into each other, chest to chest. They use their muscular tails to bash each other across the head and shoulders. Jilliak gets the upper hand. She lunges at Durga, who dodges to the side. Jilliak slams into the side of her repulsor sled. Durga takes advantage of the mistake and hits the heavy sled's power button. It crashes down on Jilliak's tail, trapping her. Jilliak tries to wriggle free, but she can't. Durga smashes his tail down on Jilliak's head, over and over and over again. Eventually, Jilliak stops moving. She's dead. Durga leaves battered, but vindicated. But with Jilliak gone, the Disilogic clan has a new leader, Jabba the Hutt. 1 year later, Han and Chewie return from their adventures and arrive on Nar Shaddaa. Once again, they need some credits, and Han decides it's time to get back to doing what the two do best, running spice. Before Han can meet with Jabba, however, Bria Theron shows up. She's now a commander in the Corellian Resistance, one of the 3 largest factions of the growing Rebel Alliance. The two make awkward small talk, remembering how Bria left Han on Coruscant a decade ago. Bria knows Han needs credits, and she has a proposition. The Resistance is planning a strike on Elysia. They aim to free the slaves, destroy the refineries, and steal whatever spice and credits they can carry. Bankrolling a rebellion is expensive. Bria says she has the troops to handle the Elysian ground forces and the slaves, but the Resistance doesn't have skilled pilots who can navigate the planet's tumultuous atmosphere. She says if Han can get some of the smugglers to fly with the Resistance, they can take a cut of the spice. And Han and Chewie can take a cut of Teruenza's collection of artifacts. Han convinces the smugglers, and the invasion of Elysia commences. A few of the Resistance shuttles are destroyed on landing, but Bria and her troops eventually land on the beachhead. The rebels take moderate casualties as they enter the colonies, but it's soon clear that the Elysian defenses are no match for the Resistance troops. In fact, one of the toughest things for Bria's forces is herding up the slaves and keeping them calm. They beg and plead for the exaltation, but with all the Talanda Till now dead, the slaves start to revolt against their liberators. With no other option, Bria orders her troops to stun the slaves and load them onto the transports. Han is shocked at what happens, but he quickly remembers why he and the smugglers are here. They begin searching for choice barrels of the refined spice. But Bria's troops turn their blasters on the smugglers. Confused, Han turns to Bria and demands an explanation. "I'm sorry, Han," she says. "New orders. The Resistance is taking everything. We thank you and your friends for their help. We couldn't have freed the planet without them. But we need the credits. You and the others are free to leave." Han returns to Nar Shaddaa. He's broke and branded a traitor by the other smugglers. Desperate for money, Han and Chewie take a spice smuggling run from Jabba. It's to Kessel and back, a run the two smugglers have made about a dozen times. However, this time the duo are chased by a pair of Imperial patrol craft. Han runs from the Imperials, passing closer to the Maul cluster than anyone has before. When Han and Chewie look at the sensors, they realize it's the fastest Kessel run that they've ever heard of. In fact, it looks like they skimmed the Maul so closely that the fluctuations in space-time have shortened the distance that the Falcon traveled. Han looks at Chewie. "Less than 12 parsecs?" he says. "That's a new record." But the two don't get a chance to celebrate. When they emerge from the Kessel run, they run right into another Imperial patrol. Trapped between the two, Han dumps the spice before the Imperials board and search the Falcon. Afterward, he and Chewie fly to Tatooine. They try to explain what happened to Jabba, but the new head of the Disilogic clan doesn't want excuses. He wants his spice. Jabba tells Han he has 10 days to pay for the lost spice, or the Hutt will put a price on his head so high that every bounty hunter in the galaxy will be looking for him. While Han and Chewie try to raise the credits for Jabba, Bria leads the Corellian resistance on a raid on an Imperial base on Tapwara. The mission? To steal secret plans for a new Imperial space station and transmit them to a Corellian corvette that will pass over the planet at a specific time. It's a suicide mission. Volunteers only. But it's the only chance that the new Rebel Alliance has to find a weak point on the Imperial station. Bria leads the assault on the base. They slice into the computer and download the plans. But the rebels are trapped, and they know it. They barricade the doors as more Imperial stormtroopers arrive. Luckily, the Tantive 4 arrives in orbit over Tapwara right on time. Bria transmits the plans just as the stormtroopers enter the building. Bria and her troops are killed, but their mission is a success. The story ends on Tatooine. Han and Chewie are in Mos Eisley. They enter Chalmun's cantina looking for a job. They'll do anything to raise the credits to pay back Jabba. At the bar, Chewie meets an old man looking to hire a transport. The Wookiee says he and his partner have a ship. Chewie leads the old man and a young farm boy to a table in the corner where Han Solo is waiting. Time to take a break. When we return, I'll talk more about Rebel Dawn. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But allow me to recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Queen's Hope tells the story of Padme Amidala undertaking a secret mission during the Clone War, while her handmaiden and best friend, Sabe, doubles for Padme in the Senate. It's a fast-paced tale that's a fitting end to the Padme Amidala Queen's trilogy. That's Queen's Hope by E.K. Johnston. Welcome back in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today I'm talking about Rebel Dawn by A.C. Crispin, the third and final book in the Han Solo trilogy. Well, I'm sure it doesn't come as a surprise to you listeners that Rebel Dawn, for me, is a slight step down from the first two books in the series. My favorite book in the series is The Paradise Snare. I also really enjoyed The Hutt Gambit. I think Rebel Dawn is a bit of a step down, but it is enjoyable. One thing I have to note, Crispin has to figure out, one, how to finish this book at the point where Han and Chewie are about to meet Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The other thing that this book does, and I don't know if Crispin decided to do this on her own or if Lucasfilm asked her, but she has to figure out a way to incorporate the events from the old Brian Daley Han Solo adventures from the late 70s and early 80s. Crispin decides to do this by having a time jump in the middle of the story. The Paradise Snare is a story that takes place over about 6 to 8 months. There's a time jump before the second book, The Hutt Gambit. The events of that book take place over about a year, maybe slightly over a year. Then there's another time jump to this book. It's not quite as long. It's only about 6 or 7 months. But after Han wins the Falcon at the Sabacc tournament on Cloud City, we have a number of time jumps within the story. There's a jump to Kashyyyk. There's a jump after Kashyyyk. And then the large one is the jump to the corporate sector. The corporate sector is where the Brian Daley Han Solo adventures take place. Again, I don't know if A.C. Crispin decided to factor that in on her own, or if Lucasfilm asked her to factor that in. We have examples in Legends of authors either not coordinating with each other on some of the events that happen, or completely omitting some of the events that took place on the timeline before the book that they happen to be writing. And of course, we also have some authors that completely ignore some of the events that took place before the book that they are writing. I give Crispin credit for factoring in the events of the Han Solo adventures. She also factors in the events of the Lando Calrissian adventures by L. Neil Smith. She even includes, in the second book, The Hutt Gambit, one of the characters from the Lando Calrissian adventures, the droid Vufi Ra. So it wasn't a surprise that Crispin factored in Han Solo at Star's End, Han Solo's Revenge, Han Solo and The Lost Legacy. These were some of the most popular Star Wars stories in the late 70s and early 80s. They are fun adventure stories. I'll be getting to them on the podcast in 2025, the Han Solo adventures and the Lando Calrissian adventures. But I think factoring those stories in, specifically the Han Solo adventures that take place in the corporate sector, and having that time jump in this book, for me, it affects the flow of the story. It's a little bit difficult to describe, but in my opinion, most stories have a natural flow as you're reading them, as you're watching them on TV or watching them on the big screen, or as you're playing a video game. There is a flow to the story. And for me, this jump of 1 year affects that flow. But that's not to say that things didn't happen in the year that Han and Chewie are away. During that time, Durga, with the help of the Black Sun Crime Syndicate, is able to find the proof that he had been looking for, that Jiliak and Jabba had a hand in assassinating Lord Auric, employing Terroenza behind Besettiai's back, and conspiring with the Talanda Till to feed Lord Auric the toxin that eventually killed him. There's also a scene where Bria leads a raid by the Corellian resistance on a slave ship that had recently left Elysia. They raid the ship. They're able to rescue the slaves. There's a scene where Bria is again undercover, like she was in the Hutt Gambit. And she's on this pleasure yacht. Lando happens to be there on the pleasure yacht. Now, he doesn't know who Bria is, but Lando has an eye for beautiful women. He's able to talk with Bria. He asks her to dinner. At that dinner, they learn who each other are and their relationship to Han Solo. As Bria goes back to her cabin later on, Boba Fett tries to capture her. Lando walks in. Lando also gets captured. It turns out that Fett was hired by Terroenza. He's still upset over the damage that Bria and Han caused when they escaped Elysia about 8 years prior. Luckily for them, they are able to escape. However, while Fett has Bria in custody and is getting ready to load her onto his ship to take her to Elysia, she asks Boba Fett to do her one favor. She asks the bounty hunter that once she dies, can Fett contact her father on Corellia just to let him know? And Fett agrees. Flash forward to when Han and Chewie return to Hutt Space. the new Rebel Alliance concocts this plan to free the slaves on Elysia, but that's not the main purpose, it turns out, of the raid. The main purpose is to take as much of the refined spice as possible. Because a rebellion, it's expensive to bankroll. The one thing the new Rebel Alliance doesn't have is a bunch of really good pilots. And who are some of the best pilots we know of in the galaxy at this time? They're the smugglers. So Han convinces a bunch of the smugglers to fly the ships that the Corellian resistance has to land their troops on Elysia. That's it. That's their job. They land the ships. They stay on the ships while the resistance troops take out the ground forces on Elysia. But then Bria betrays them. She doesn't tell Han or Lando or the other smugglers that they're not going to be able to take their cut of the spice, a cut that she promised them. While they're planning for this raid, Han and Bria get back together. They rekindle their romance from 8 or 9 years ago. But just like before, they don't talk to each other. Han is convinced that Bria will agree to marry him. The two of them, along with Chewie, will work as smugglers for a few years until they build up enough credits that they can retire and then go legitimate. Bria is convinced that Han will join her in the Corellian resistance, that they'll both fight with the new Rebel Alliance. She begs Han to come with her. He almost looks at her like she's speaking a different language because he believed that she was going to come with him. It's probably the most emotional scene in the book. And that's when Han finally completely tells Bria that he's through with her, that she can take her rebellion and stick it where the sun don't shine. And Bria apologizes for what she's done, but she does tell Han, you knew how much being a slave on Elysia messed me up. And you knew how much I wanted to get even with Teroenza and how badly I wanted to free the other slaves. But neither of them talked to each other about it. Both of them believed that the feelings they had for each other, the love they felt for one another, would be enough to convince the other person to follow them on their path. So, after they break up, Han returns to smuggling. Bria returns to the Resistance. Han and Chewie make the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Everyone knows that when Lucas included that in A New Hope, he made a mistake. Parsecs, while it does have SEC at the end of the word, it is not a measure of time. It's a measure of extreme distance in space. I like the way Crispin resolves that in this story. The existence of the Maw cluster, so close to Kessel. The Maw cluster is an anomaly in space of a group of black holes. Well, that extreme gravity can distort space-time. And in this story, Crispin writes that the Millennium Falcon passes so close to the edge of the Maw cluster as it's traveling through the Kessel Run that it's actually influenced by the anomaly, that it travels so close to some of the black holes in the Maw that space-time is folded, and it shortens the distance of the Kessel Run, a distance that is normally about 14 to 15 parsecs. Han and Chewie are able to take advantage of some sort of fold in space-time and actually cut the distance down to less than 12 parsecs. If you don't know what a parsec actually is, it doesn't take away from the scene in A New Hope. If you learn what a parsec is, I would contend it still doesn't take away from that scene. It's just a mistake. Mistakes happen in movie making all the time. But it's clear that enough people have pointed out that a parsec is actually a measure of distance instead of time, that Crispin decided that she would fix, quote unquote, that statement from A New Hope. I think it's a little tongue-in-cheek. I think it's a little wink-wink at the audience. I don't have a problem with that. I know some other people may. I know some people aren't big fans of breaking the fourth wall with the audience. And I'm not saying that's exactly what this is. It's just the way I read it. It seems a little wink-wink. I'm fine with that. I think it's a little cool inclusion that Crispin made in here. Anyway, while Han is doing that, Bria and the Corellian Resistance raid an Imperial base on the planet Tapwara. In the Legends universe, we have, at least 2, maybe 3 different stories on how the Death Star plans were stolen. In Dark Forces, it's Kyle Katarn who steals the Death Star plans. In this story, it's Bria Theron and the Corellian Resistance that steal the Death Star plans. I think there might be one more in Legends. I can't exactly remember how it is, but I'm pretty sure there's one more story about how the Death Star plans were stolen. But regardless, it's a suicide mission. The Corellian Resistance is able to download the plans. They're able to upload it to the Corellian Corvette, the Tantive 4 that passes over the planet at exactly the time it is supposed to pass over, beaming the plans to Captain Antilles and a very young senator from Alderaan. That's how Bria's story ends. Now, elsewhere, after having to dump his spice following his record-breaking Kessel Run, Han has to go to Tatooine to apologize to Jabba and to beg for his forgiveness. Jabba's forgiveness comes with a price. That price is the value of the spice that Han had to dump. So, Han has 10 days to pay the crime lord back. He goes into Mos Eisley. He starts asking around for any job where he can make some credits quick. And he and Chewie are confronted by Boba Fett. Initially, Han thinks he's a goner, that Jabba has already put the bounty on his head. This is it. But Boba Fett stops, says he's not there for Han, and all he says is, Bria Theron is dead. Bria never got a chance to tell Boba Fett who her father was and where he lived. So the only thing Fett could come up with is, once Bria was dead, to tell Han and let Han get in touch with Bria's father. Obviously, the news saddens Han. He is able to record a hollow message for Bria's father, and he sends it to him. He tells Bria's father what she had been doing the last few years, her work with the rebellion, and that she died a hero. After he sends the message, he and Chewie return to look for some work in order to raise the credits for Jabba, and that's where the story ends. They enter Chalmun's Cantina, and we all know what happens then. I like the way that Crispin incorporates the first few scenes from A New Hope. Occasionally, for me, some of these stories are a little too interconnected. You know, it makes the galaxy feel small on some level, but I like the way Crispin does it here. To me, this doesn't make the galaxy feel small. The main character is Han Solo. We know where Han Solo has to get to at the end of the story. He has to get to Chalmun's Cantina. Bria Theron is a Corellian. She's a member of the Corellian Resistance. The Resistance is able to transmit the plans to the first Death Star to a Corellian Corvette. Captain Antilles, the captain of the Corvette, is a Corellian. All of that makes sense to me. None of that makes the galaxy feel small, in my opinion. For others, it may make the galaxy feel smaller. But for me, the way Crispin does it works. Well, it's time to wrap up. Listener, if you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email me at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. Send me a question. Send me your opinions about the books we've talked about on the show. Or, if I said something you disagree with, let me know. I'll read that on the podcast. And keep sending in your Star Wars character groupings. Your fighter squadrons, your Mount Rushmores, your road trip crews, whatever. I love reading those on the show. Coming up next on the Star Wars Legends Lounge, I'll start a new trilogy to finish out the year. Well, sort of a trilogy. More of an unofficial one. Featuring perhaps Luke Skywalker's most contentious love interest in Legends. That's right. It's Children of the Jedi by Barbara Hambly. The first book in the often called Callista Chronicles or Callista Trilogy. You can look forward to that episode coming out on November 29th. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Motes. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.